I've always looked at Jackie as some kind of icon. He was a pillar of strength, and he gave me a lot of inner strength. I knew some of the things that he had gone through, so when I looked at him, I thought, not only is this man a great athlete, but he's a great man off the field for people like myself. When I think of my background, where I came from, and what I had to go through, I think of those who gave me strength. My mother and my father and a few outsiders. Jackie Robinson gave all of us, not only black athletes, but every black person in this country, a sense of our own strength. And that is from Hank Aaron. And this is an excerpt from the book we're going to talk about today. I Never Had It Made, an autobiography of Jackie Robinson.
Welcome to Performers, the podcast that takes you into the minds of the world's most extraordinary athletes, coaches, and performers. We're your hosts. I'm Dr. Greg Young, and you've just heard from Dr. Duncan Simpson. And as sports psychology experts, we'll guide you through the pages of their autobiographies, revealing the mindsets, strategies, and habits that propelled the world's best to the pinnacle of their fields.
Greg, before we go any further, I want to acknowledge that we had some audio issues in episode 11 on Alex Honnold, especially on my end. Although such issues are obviously unwanted, hopefully we didn't compromise your listening experience too much. As I've said before, we've been in the mental performance field for 15 plus years, but we've only been in podcasting for 3 months. So I'm going to use one of the maxims I use all the time with my athletes and apply it to myself. Where you start has absolutely no bearing on where you'll end up. So, Greg, I know we're both committed to making this podcast as great as possible for our listeners, and we truly appreciate everyone for taking the time to listen.
Absolutely, and I think a little bit of resilience and bounce back ability for us coming into this one. So getting back to it, why this book today then, Duncan?
To be honest, Greg, this is incredibly daunting to try and effectively distill and communicate the impact of Jackie Robinson into one podcast. And it's probably a task we're somewhat doomed to fail at in that sense. However, hopefully we can connect enough dots and highlight some of the key habits and mental strategies he used to become a sporting and social icon. As always, we truly recommend you buy the book and read the entire story. And of course, there are numerous other resources that you can dig into around Jackie's life if you want to learn more.
So Duncan, give us a little bit of insight into Jackie's athletic accomplishments.
Well, he has many, so hold your breath for this list. He played for the undefeated UCLA football teams in 1939. Robinson was also an NCAA champion in the long jump, and ironically, baseball was his worst sport at UCLA, where he led it in 4 sports. When it comes to baseball and his major league career, he had a lifetime batting average of .313, 141 home runs, 761 RBIs. He had a 10-year career in Major League Baseball with the Dodgers. He played in 6 World Series, winning it once. He was a 6-time All-Star. He was the National League MVP. He was the Major League Rookie of the Year. He was the National League Batting Champion. He was the 2-time National League Stolen Base Leader. The Los Angeles Dodgers retired his number 42 jersey. The number 42 has been retired by all Major League Baseball teams since 2013. He was in Major League Baseball's All-Century team, and he was a first ballot Hall of Famer in 1962, and he was also the first black player inducted into Cooperstown Museum. So, of course, when we talk about Jackie Robinson only in terms of his sporting accomplishments, we would not be recognizing the cultural and social impact he made far beyond that baseball diamond. He was the first African-American to play Major League Baseball in the modern era, which set the wheels in motion to desegregate Major League Baseball. In 1999, he's named by Time magazine on its list of 100 most influential people of the 20th century. After his death in 1972, Robinson was posthumously awarded the Congressional Gold Medal and the Presidential Medal of Freedom in recognition of his achievements on and off the field. I said it was daunting to distill his life into one podcast, but we're going to do our best.
Yeah, that's all we've got time for on this episode of Performers. There's a lot there to dig into, so let's jump right in.
My grandfather was born into slavery, and although my mother and father, Mally and Jerry Robinson, lived during an era where physical slavery had been abolished, they also lived in a newer, more sophisticated kind of slavery than the kind Mr. Lincoln struck down. My parents were married in 1909, and my father worked on a plantation for $12 a month. My mother encouraged him to confront his boss and ask for a better deal. Since he didn't want to lose him, the boss agreed to let my father become a half cropper. That means that instead of working for a flat sum, he would get half the profits from whatever he produced from the earth. My father began to make more money and provide a better living for the family, my mother and 5 children. My mother was afraid that my father would not come back now that he's making more money, and her fears were justified. Later, she learned that he had left home and gone away with the neighbor's wife. To this day, I have no idea what became of my father. Later, when I became aware of how much my mother had to endure alone, I could only think of him with bitterness. So, Greg, no dad in the picture, and he's definitely coming from some really humble beginnings here.
No question about it. These are absolutely humble beginnings and probably not unique circumstances for people of color around that time.
My mother was 30 when we started out for California. As I grew older, I often thought about the courage it took for my mother to break away from the South. She indoctrinated us with the importance of family unity, religion, and kindness towards others. Her great dream for us was that we would go to school. So here, Greg, she's instilling some family values, and I'm just going to continue a little bit more about his childhood. Along with a number of other children in the neighborhood, I had a lot of free time and I had a lot of freedom. Some of it I put to good use. I had a paper route. I cut grass and I ran errands when I could. The rest of the time I stole all sorts of small things from stores, particularly food. And I was a member in good standing of the Pepper Street Gang. We snitched what we could from local stores, and all the time we were aware of the growing resentment at being deprived of some of the advantages the white kids had. So, Greg, we're hearing he's got a lot of freedom to socialize, but he's also getting into a little bit of bother.
It sounds like he did, and the parallels here with Pele's story, who grew up in Brazil as opposed to the US, and in similar sort of poverty, if we can call it that. And what we saw with Pele was, in order to get his team funded, one of the things that he went out and did was maybe flirting with the law a little bit. And it sounds like that's similar to what Jackie was doing here with the Pepper Street Gang. But what we also see on the other side of things is those family values being instilled at home. Jackie Robinson's mother here trying to instill those family values of family unity, religion, kindness towards others. And I think that's very similar cloth to what Pele was cut from as well. And those are very similar values to those that his mother was trying to instill in him and his brothers and sisters too.
And weren't you a member of the Pepper Street Gang?
I was a member of the Pepper Street Gang. I was the tall one with the big nose in the cartoons.
Well, he goes on to say, one of my frustrations of my teens was watching mother work so hard. I wanted to help more, but I knew how much my college education meant to her. Sports had been a big thing for me ever since I was a little boy. In grammar school, some of my classmates would share their lunches with me if I played on their team. When I went to John Muir Technical High, I earned letters in football, basketball, baseball, and track. I enjoyed competition, and I was aggressive in my determination to win. While at Pasadena Junior College, I had beaten the record of my older brother, Mac, in broad jumping. I had the greatest respect for Mac because of his achievements in track. Even though doctors warned him that his participation in sports could be fatal because he had a heart ailment, he wouldn't give up. He earned a big name on the West Coast as a sprinter, and in 1939 he thrilled our family and neighborhood by finishing second to Jesse Owens in the Berlin Olympics. The heart condition never defeated Mac. Greg, it sounds like Jackie was a really well-rounded athlete.
It does. We heard a little bit of this from Drew Brees as well, all the way back in episode 3, I think it was, many thousands of moons ago at this stage. But Drew Brees also sort of followed a similar path where he didn't specialize in football until sort of later in high school, and obviously went on and had a very prosperous college career and professional career. But he was playing baseball, he was playing other sports, enjoying that, and becoming a very well-rounded athlete, developing a lot of skills through what is essentially cross-training. And it's usually something that sets athletes up for really long-term success.
And he continues this. He goes to UCLA and he says, at UCLA, I became the university's first 4-letter man. I participated in basketball, baseball, football, and track. I didn't think anything could come into my life that would be more vital to me than my sports career. After 2 years at UCLA, I decided to leave. I was convinced that no amount of education would help a black man get a job. I felt I was living in an academic and athletic dream world. It seemed very necessary for me to relieve some of my mother's financial burdens, even though I knew it had always been her dream to have me finish college. But the university begged me to stay on and graduate. They even offered me extra financial support. Ray, who was his girlfriend and then future wife, also felt very strongly about the importance of a degree. Despite all this, I could see no future in staying at college, no future in athletics, and I wanted to do the next best thing, become an athletic director. The thought of working with youngsters in the field of sports excited me. Given the historical context and racial segregation, Greg, at this time, Jackie just can't see a life for himself in professional sports. Remember, in those days, no major football, basketball, or Major League Baseball clubs hired black players. So he just doesn't have a vision that this can be a viable option for him.
Sounds a little bit not the same, but it sounds a little bit similar to Alex Honnold's experience at Cal Berkeley that we talked about in our last episode, where he wasn't sure that Cal Berkeley was essentially going to serve his needs and prepare him for the path that he was interested in going down. And, obviously his direction was climbing, very, very different to what's going on with Jackie here. But it seems like while you may not be getting an education from these institutions, completing it and getting a piece of paper, you're getting an education from these institutions and maybe coming to some realizations that are going to put you on a really solid path to pursue what it is you actually have your passion in.
So Jackie leaves UCLA and he takes a job as an assistant athletic director with the government's National Youth Administration. However, the government ceased funding for this program, and in 1941, Jackie decides to travel to Honolulu to play football for a semi-professional team, which is a racially integrated team called the Honolulu Bears. After a very short season, he left Honolulu back to California, Greg, and listen to this. On December 5th, 1941, he left Honolulu. 2 days later, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. So Jackie's sliding doors moment was that he wasn't involved in that. The US was subsequently pulled into the war, and Jackie was drafted into the Army Cavalry Unit, which was in Kansas. A little more, he's in the unit for a while, but in 1944, he's court-martialed for refusing to move to the back of the bus by a driver, even though the Army had commissioned non-segregated bus lines. Luckily, these court proceedings actually meant that he wasn't deployed overseas and he never saw combat. So, Greg, the reason I give you some historical context here, we've got some real sliding doors moments. He misses the Pearl Harbor bombing. He gets court-martialed. So, because of the court proceedings, he can't then travel abroad and he isn't deployed abroad, so he doesn't face combat. If he didn't stand up for his civil rights, we may never have heard of Jackie Robinson because he may have been deployed, and he would have been deployed over in Europe.
It sounds like a real domino effect. As you were reading through that, it almost seemed like those are the transitions that you'd see in Forrest Gump, where there's the knock-on effect of him doing one small thing and then another thing and then another thing. But we are certainly seeing the seeds of that civil rights presence, as it were, for want of a better word, coming to the forefront here. And you're right, that those sliding doors moments, I think if we've got anything that is absolutely consistent across all of our performers that we've discussed so far, that there has definitely been the presence of this sliding doors moment where it could have gone in one direction or a different direction. And for everyone so far, those directions have turned out to be pretty productive and pretty positive ones.
The path to high performance is certainly not a linear one. So another coincidence, while he's waiting trial, he's serving as a coach for Army athletics before he was eventually honorably discharged in 1944. But while he was there, he runs into a gentleman that again impacts his life in a significant way. He says, while I was waiting for discharge, I ran into a brother named Alexander, who, before going into uniform, had been a member of the Kansas City Monarchs. The Monarchs were one of the teams of the professional black baseball world. Alexander and I got into conversation and he told me there was good money in black baseball. He said that the Monarchs were looking for players. I was looking for a decent post-war job. So I wrote to the Monarchs. After checking me out, they responded rather quickly and accepted me on a tryout basis for spring training. I was ordered to report to Houston. The pay of $400 a month was a financial bonanza for me. My pitcher friend had told the truth about the pay. He had also said that I would enjoy life of pro baseball. Well, maybe he enjoyed it. For me, it turned out to be a pretty miserable way to make a buck. So a little bit about his experience here, Greg. Says, blacks who wanted to play baseball could sign up only on black teams. These teams were poorly financed, and their management and promotion left much to be desired. Travel schedules were unbelievably hectic. Our team played in Kansas City, moved throughout the entire Midwest, and sometimes went south and east. On one occasion, we left Kansas City on a bus on a Sunday night, traveled to Philadelphia, reaching down Tuesday morning. We played a doubleheader that night, and the next day we were on the road again. This fatiguing travel wouldn't have been so bad if we could have got decent meals. Finding satisfactory or even passable eating places was almost a daily problem. There was no hotel in any of these places we played. Sometimes there were hotels for blacks which had no eating facilities. No one even thought of trying to get accommodations in white hotels. Some of the crummy eating joints would not serve us at all. You could never sit down for a relaxed hot meal. You were lucky if they permitted you to carry out some greasy hamburgers in a paper bag with a container of coffee. You were really living when you were able to get a plate of cold cuts which you could eat on the team bus. Greg, this is not the glamorous existence of a pro athlete by any stretch of the imagination, and he's simultaneously encountering racism everywhere he goes.
For sure, this is the non-glamorous existence that I'm sure a number of pro athletes still maybe encounter when they're traveling around in sort of the lower leagues and trying to get across the country and sort of showing it from place to place in very non-glamorous ways. And that's probably okay for those people that are coming up through the leagues and trying to stamp themselves there. But obviously what isn't okay, but was a sad fact of the time, is the racism that he's experiencing. And we're not even really talking about racism in baseball yet. We're just talking about racism in society and him being seen as, and other players of his team being seen as literal second-class citizens and not being able to get the basic tenets of civility everywhere they go around the country. It really is a sad tale.
The black press, some liberal sports writers, and even a few politicians were banging away at those Jim Crow barriers in baseball. I never expected the walls to come tumbling down in my lifetime. I began to wonder why I should dedicate my life to a career where the boundaries for progress were set by racial discrimination. Even more serious was my growing fear that I might lose Ray again. I began to sense in her letters that her patience was thinning. She had been hoping to settle down in California to work our future out. The way I was traveling, we saw each other rarely. I felt unhappy and trapped. If I left baseball, where could I go? What could I do to earn enough money to help my mother and marry Rachel? So this lifestyle, Greg, is hugely impacting him and his social relationships. And it really sounds like he's ready to leave baseball at this stage.
There is a huge degree of sacrifice that goes on in professional and high level sports where social relationships are absolutely sacrificed and do come second, often third place to sports and the thing that people need in order to do sports and high level performance. So yeah, the struggle really is there, and there is no running away from the fact it's going to have a big impact, not only on you as the performer, but also all of your support system and all of your social system, friends, families, and of course, significant others.
So just at this moment of his career, Jackie's ready to walk away from baseball. And then he says, the solution to my problem was only days away in the hands of a tough, shrewd, and courageous man named Branch Rickey, the president of the Brooklyn Dodgers. Further, if someone had predicted that Mr. Rickey's monumentous decision would involve me and change the whole course of my life and of course of sports in America, I would have called the predictor insane. Yet all this was to happen. So, Greg, we're going to talk a little bit about Branch Rickey here and his background and how he plays just such a significant role in Jackie Robinson's story. When he became a front office executive in St. Louis, he had fought behind the scenes against the custom that consigned black spectators to the Jim Crow section of the Sportsman's Park, later to become Bush Memorial Stadium. His pleas to change the rules were in vain. Those in power argued that if blacks were allowed a free choice of seating, white business would suffer. Branch Rickey lost that fight, but when he became boss of the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1943, he felt the time for equality in baseball had come. He knew that achieving it would be terribly difficult. There would be deep resentment, determined opposition, and perhaps even racial violence. He was convinced he was morally right, and he shrewdly sensed that making the game a truly national one would have healthy financial results. He took his case before the startled directors of the club, and using persuasive eloquence, he won the first battle in what would be a long and bitter campaign. He was voted permission to make the Brooklyn club the pioneer in bringing blacks into baseball. He made certain that words of his plans did not leak out, particularly to the press. Next, he had to find the ideal player for his project, which came to be called Ricky's Noble Experiment. This player had to be one who could take abuse, name-calling, rejection by fans and sports writers, and by fellow players, not only on opposing teams but on his own. He had to be able to stand up in the face of merciless persecution and not retaliate. On the other hand, he had to be a contradiction in human terms. He still had to have a spirit. He could not be an Uncle Tom. His ability to turn the other cheek had to be predicated on the determination to gain acceptance. Once having proven his ability as a player, teammate, and man, he had to be able to cast off humbleness and stand up as a full-fledged participant whose triumph did not carry the poison of bitterness. Unknown to most people, and certainly to me, after launching a major scouting campaign, Branch Rickey had picked me as that player. Greg, Jackie's career is being designed for him, which is incredibly unique. Branch and Robinson certainly didn't see eye to eye on everything, which we'll get into a little bit later, but there was huge respect between the two of them. And we've used this maxim before, nobody does it alone. And I'm definitely not trying to belittle Jackie's accomplishments when I say this, but without Branch Rickey, there is literally no Jackie Robinson story. And to be honest, Jackie acknowledges this throughout the book. And of course, Branch Rickey was a shrewd businessman, and he saw a business opportunity, which came with racial integration. But Branch also was a man of strong morals, and he fully believed that he was doing the right thing for baseball and also for the broader American public.
I couldn't agree more, and I think this is a really nice demonstration of that. Of course, the cynic listening to this or reading the book or understanding the story of Jackie Robinson would say that this is essentially a money grab from Branch Rickey, opening up a huge new pool of players for you to be able to select talent from. That is literally, that pool is not being fished by anyone else, as it were, so you can kind of get your first refusal. Obviously, he's looking for someone of a very specific ilk, someone with all of those characteristics that you talked about to be able to be that. Let's call it what it is. It's a trailblazer in this situation here. Really, what's important here, and you said it perfectly, to not belittle Jackie Robinson's legacy here, is Jackie was only able to walk through the door after Branch Rickey had been able to open it for him. There are naturally and always going to be gatekeepers and people that can facilitate someone's entrance into a literal or proverbial room. And that person here is Branch Rickey. So you're quite right in saying we wouldn't be talking about Jackie Robinson without Branch Rickey.
And originally, Jackie thinks he's meeting Mr. Rickey once he gets the call because he thinks he wants to recruit him as a Brown Dodger, which is the Negro League team. And he goes on saying, Mr. Rickey said, "The truth is you are not a candidate for the Brooklyn Brown Dodgers. I sent for you because I'm interested in you as a candidate for the Brooklyn National League Club. I think you can play in the major leagues. How do you feel about that?" My reactions seemed like some kind of weird mixture churning in a blender. I was thrilled, scared, and excited. Most of all, I was speechless. "You think you can play for Montreal?" he demanded. I got my tongue back. "Yes," I answered. Montreal was the Brooklyn Dodgers' top farm team. The players who went there and made it had an excellent chance at the big league. "I know you're a good ball player," he barked. "What I don't know is whether you have the guts." So in this moment, Greg, his life is literally being turned upside down in an instant. Previously, Jackie didn't see that desegregation of baseball was going to happen in his lifetime.
It seems like a pretty good indicator that it's a big deal when your stomach feels like a blender. That's probably a good indicator that something big is happening, considering all of the things that he's gone through previously. And it sounds like he's going to get his chance, that there is, a natural progression to this thing. It doesn't sound, with all of my baseball expertise and historical knowledge, that you just get thrown into the major league team and, kind of sink or swim. It's an opportunity for you to prove. And what we've got here is Branch Rickey saying, "I know you're a good ball player. Let's go prove it. Let's see if you've got what it takes." And I think that is just an opportunity that is enormous, as you say, but just a great one for Jackie to be walking into.
And we're going to hear a little bit more about this context of how Jackie really transitioned in. And he says, "I wasn't just another athlete being hired by a ball club. We were playing for big stakes. This was the reason Branch Rickey's search had been so exhaustive. The search had spanned the globe and narrowed down to a few candidates, then finally me. When it looked as though I might be the number one choice, the investigation of my life, my habits, my reputation, and my character had become an intensified study. I've investigated you thoroughly, Robinson, Mr. Ricky said. One of the results of this thorough screening were reports from California athletic circles that I had been a racial agitator at UCLA. Mr. Ricky had not accepted these criticisms on face value. He had demanded and received more information and came to the conclusion that if I had been white, people would have said, here's a guy who's a contender, a competitor. After that, he had some grim words of warning. We can't fight our way through this, Robinson. We've got no army. There's virtually nobody on our side. No owners, no umpires, very few newspapermen. And I'm afraid that many fans will be hostile. We'll be in a tough position. We can win only if we can convince the world that I'm doing this because you're a great ball player and a fine gentleman. So, Greg, we've used this mantra before. Fight the war you're in, not the war you wish you were in. And Branch Rickey is basically explaining the rules of engagement here, how Jackie's going to have to behave.
He's also explaining the reality of the situation. And I think what we've got here is Branch Rickey doing what we'd probably consider to be due diligence now if we were doing talent ID in the kind of the modern era. Why do we do that due diligence? One, we want to make sure that we've got the right person for the job, for the role, right? Whatever it is that we're trying to take care of here. And Branch Rickey wants to set Jackie Robinson up for success here. Now, why does he want to do that? He wants to set him up for success because he wants him to be the best possible ball player that he can be, and obviously to help the Dodgers. But he's probably acutely aware this is the only shot he's got at doing this. If we're talking about someone being on the cutting edge of this and essentially racial integration into the major league, and when you don't have a lot of allies, when there's no one on your side and you're having to go alone, you've got to take this one swing and you've got to hope that this one swing lands. And I think he's acutely aware of that. And he's really making sure that he picks the right person for the right time, for the right moment, for the right place to be able to get the outcomes that they're both, absolutely longing for and really desire.
And that's a great segue into this section, Greg. And he says, he had me transfixed as he spoke. I could feel his sincerity. And I began to get a sense of how much this major step meant to him. Because of his nature and his passion for justice, he had to do what he was doing. If you're a good enough man, we can make this a start in the right direction. But let me tell you, it's going to take an awful lot of courage. He asked it slowly and with great care. Have you got the guts to play the game no matter what happens? I think I can play the game, Mr. Ricky, I said. So, Greg, we're talking more than baseball here. We're really talking about the person who Jackie is, his integrity, his values. And Ricky has a very clear vision and a plan about how he's going to execute this and how he needs Jackie to execute it on his behalf.
He cares about him as a person. And I know that doesn't sound like a big deal because we've talked about Pat Summitt and we've talked about other people in all of our episodes that were really paying attention to the person. But as a white man, as a white gatekeeper into a white sport, he is caring about Jackie Robinson and just seeing him as a person that he wants to succeed here. And although that doesn't seem like a big deal, given the context, the societal context around this is absolutely huge. This is a pivotal moment in essentially all of sport here, particularly American sport.
And we're going to finish off this segment. And he says, the next few minutes were tough. Branch Rickey had to make absolutely sure that I knew what I would face. Beanballs would be thrown at me. I would be called the kind of names which would hurt and infuriate any man. I would be physically attacked. Could I take all of this and control my temper? Remain steadfastly loyal to our ultimate aim? Mr. Ricky, I asked, are you looking for a Negro who's afraid to fight back? I will never forget the way he exploded. Robinson, he said, I'm looking for a ball player with guts enough not to fight back. Greg, that's an amazing last statement there. I'm looking for a ball player with guts enough not to fight back.
You're correct. That is an incredibly profound statement. And as you were talking there, my mind was drawn to a poem that I really like, and I think you're a fan of it too. And that's If by Rudyard Kipling. And particularly the first line of that poem, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. And I've always thought that focus or that ability is a real superpower. And it sounds like that's something that's really going to be put to the test for Jackie here. people are, it's not too strong of a word to say, people are going to hate him for the thing that he's about to embark on. And he needs to be acutely aware of that and be able to deal with that and really have the guts to be able to absorb all of that and continue on moving forward in the direction that he wants to move on, to have the impact that he wants to have.
So Jackie continues the season with the Monarch Royals and really has different experiences depending upon different parts of the country. And he reflects on this and he says, on the positive side, Ray and I noticed in Florida and in cities like Jersey City that Black fans were beginning to turn out in unprecedented numbers despite extremely adverse conditions. Their presence, their cheers, their pride all came through to me, and I knew they were counting on me to make it. It put a heavy burden of responsibility on me, but it was a glorious challenge. On the good days, the cries of approval made me feel 10 feet tall. But my mistakes, no matter how small, plunged me into a deep depression. I guess Black as well as white fans recognize this, and that is why they gave me that extra support I needed so badly. Greg, in episode 10 with Pele, we talked about how representing national teams can be both a tremendous source of pride and can also come with extreme expectations and pressures. It sounds like Jackie is under enormous pressure here to succeed, but he does simultaneously have really good support.
The pressure here is undeniable, right? And we talked about being that trailblazer, that essentially that figurehead of a movement here. And unfortunately, and maybe as we saw with Pele as well, that heavy lays the head that wears the crown.
And despite this support, Greg, throughout the season, Jackie was subjected to real extreme racism, both from fans and opposing teams. And he said, I had received a classic education in how it felt to be the object of bitter hatred. The toll that incidents like these took were greater than I realized. I was overestimating my stamina and underestimating the beating I was taking. I couldn't sleep and I often couldn't eat. Every man has his limits, and we're clearly hearing how this abuse is impacting his both physical and his mental health.
Performance takes its toll, a cost that every athlete faces. When you then layer in this unspeakable racism and the other burdens that he has to bear being in the position that he's in, it's kind of like any other athlete performing, but almost like in a weighted vest, putting on one of those big heavy vests and going out there and trying to execute. Yeah, in that moment, it might not necessarily feel like it's taking a toll, but as soon as you take a step back and really closely assess things, it really isn't going to be good for anyone's physical health or mental health as well. And I totally understand and really empathize with him being in this situation.
And the team's been really successful and they win the pennant, and they're going to play Louisville Colonels, who won the American Association in what's called the Little World Series, which I didn't know. The 3 games held in Louisville were vital baseball-wise and extremely significant racially. Louisville turned out to be the most critical test of my ability to handle abuse. In a quiet but firm way, Louisville was as rigidly segregationist as any city in the Deep South. The tension was terrible, and I was greeted with some of the worst, bitter and abusive language I had yet experienced. I'd been in a deep funk for a few days before the game. Although I didn't expect the atmosphere to be nearly as bad as it turned out to be, I couldn't hit my stride. With a sick heart, damp hands, and a sweaty brow, and nerves on edge, I saw my team go down to defeat in 2 of the 3 games. To make up for this, we would have to win 3 out of 4 final games that we played in Montreal. When we arrived in that city, we discovered that the Canadians were up in arms of the way I had been treated. Greeting us warmly, they let us know how they felt. They displayed their resentment against Louisville and their loyalty to us on the first day of our return to play the final games by letting loose an avalanche of boos against Louisville players the minute they came on the field. All through the first game, they booed every time a Louisville player came out of the dugout. It was difficult to be sure how I felt. I didn't approve of this kind of retaliation, but I felt a jubilant sense of gratitude for the way the Canadians expressed their feelings. When fans go to bat for you like that, you feel it would be easy to play for them forever. I guess the rest of the team felt that way too. At any rate, we played as if we did. The confidence and love of those fans acted like a tonic to our team. We ended up winning 3 straight to win the championship. My slump had disappeared, and I finished the series hitting .400 and scoring the winning run in the final game. So Greg, we're hearing a lot of social support, and it has a direct impact on his ultimate performance.
I actually disagree with him here, and I don't think that this is really a kind of retaliation, booing opposing players as they come out the dugout, considering all of the things that he's had to endure in his time away from Montreal. I think that's the least they deserve. But going back to your point, the social support that he and his team received has a direct impact on performance. And we do know this. This is a sort of something from classic sports psychology, something that we call social facilitation. And at its basic tenets, if we're observed doing something, then we're more likely to perhaps put in a little bit of effort. If we know we've got the backing of other people around us, we're probably going to put in a little bit of effort and try a little bit more, a little bit harder. If we know we've got people pulling for us and on the same team as us, then we're more likely to try and work a little bit more dynamically to try and get the outcome and the results that we want. But also knowing that you've got people there that are empathizing with your cause from a personal standpoint, feeling that you've got that support as well. I think that can't be overestimated. Yes, it's about the task, and we're trying to win a baseball game here if we strip it back to its very, very bare essence. But really, what we're talking about here is a human story, and people in his corner, pardon the pun, going to bat for him, as he says, and really showing that they believe in him and believe in what they're trying to do as a ball club, and being on the front foot and showing that they really support him in his endeavors and the team around him doing that.
Jackie also receives a lot of social support from his wife, and reflecting on the season, he says, "She had insisted on traveling with me during the first season with Montreal because she knew I needed her. Often I would come home, tired, discouraged, wondering if I could go on, enduring the verbal and even the physical provocations and continue to turn the other cheek. Rachel knew exactly how I felt, and she would have the right words and the perfect way of comforting me. Rachel's understanding love was a powerful antidote for the poison of being taunted by fans, sneered at by fellow players, and constantly mistreated because of my blackness." Greg, while Jackie did have social support from some of his white teammates, it was his wife here who's playing such a crucial role at this stage of his career.
I think what's important here is his teammates are probably going to give him that support that he needs as a baseball player, as a person that's performing a task and going out there and executing within the game. But really what his wife's giving here is support for him as a person and support for him as essentially as a spouse and someone that she loves, and maybe more seeing to his emotional needs as opposed to his technical and tactical physical need that would be occurring within the baseball club. This is a really, really important thing for him to have, and the support, particularly in this first year with the team where, let's face it, things are probably going to be the hardest and the most difficult. Having that other element of social support there is more than likely a very, very useful tool here.
So after the Monarchs win the Little World Series, he says the big question as spring training for the 1947 season became imminent was whether Branch Rickey would move me out of the minor league and up to the Brooklyn Dodgers. Mr. Rickey had to move cautiously and with skill and strategy. In the latter part of January, I was ordered to report back to the Montreal Royals for spring training in Cuba. We thought it was a hopeful sign that both the Dodgers and the Royals would be training in Havana. I was told I must learn to play first base. This disturbed me because I felt it might mean a delay in reaching the majors. However, it was felt that the Dodgers, in order to become contenders for the pennant, had to strengthen the first base position. The fact that I had been assigned to the first base aroused fear in the Dodgers camp. They sensed that Mr. Rickey was planning to bring me up to the Dodgers. Some of the players got together and decided to sign a petition declaring they would not play with me on the team. Mr. Rickey put down the rebellion with steamroller effectiveness. The ringleaders were called in individually, and Mr. Rickey told each one that petitions would make no difference. He said he would carry out his plan regardless of protests. Anyone who was not willing to have a black teammate could quit. The petition protest collapsed before it got started. I batted .625 and stole 7 bases during 7 Royal Dodger games. Not even this made the Brooklyn players ask for me as Mr. Rickey had hoped. On the morning of April 9th, 1947, just before an exhibition game, reporters in the press box received a single sheet of paper with a one-line announcement. It read, "Brooklyn announces the purchase of the contract of Jackie Roosevelt Robinson from Montreal. Signed, Branch Rickey." So Greg, imagine going into a clubhouse where he clearly knows he's not wanted by a large section of the players.
And those numbers are quite ridiculous. Batting 625, that means you get on base basically 60% of the time, 6 out of 10 at bats you get on base, and stole 7 bases. So it's clearly not because he isn't a talented player. He is clearly a talented player and deserves to be in that Brooklyn Major League Ball Club, probably starting team. It is definitely literally because of who he is as a person, because of the color of his skin. And that's got to be a really daunting task, to be walking into that ball club, into that clubhouse, knowing that people really don't want you there. But to temper that, the person that really counts, the person at the kind of the top of the tree, the gatekeeper there, as it were, if there was ever a sign that he has his back, this has got to be the biggest sign of all.
So it's important to note, he didn't make his major league debut until he was 28 years of age. Less than a week after I became number 42 for the Brooklyn club, I played my first game with the team. I did a miserable job. There was an overflow crowd at Ebbets Field. If they expected any miracles out of Robinson, they were sadly disappointed. I was in another slump. Early in the season, the Philadelphia Phillies came to Ebbets Field for a 3-game series. I could scarcely believe my ears. Almost as if it had been synchronized by some master conductor, hate poured forth from the Phillies dugout. I have to admit that this day, of all the unpleasant days in my life, brought me nearer to cracking up than I had ever been before. I felt tortured, and I tried just to play ball and ignore the insults, but it was really getting to me. Greg, there's a lot of pressure on him here, both to perform and also manage the abuse from the other team.
I don't think he can manage the abuse from the other team. That's just going to come. What he might be able to manage, and sounds like what he's been able to manage to this point, is his focus. And you defined focus in a previous episode as the absence of irrelevant thoughts. And yes, you can argue to the game of baseball that this abuse is an irrelevant thought. It isn't useful. It isn't helpful. It isn't beneficial to Jackie Robinson in playing the game of baseball. But I'm under no misapprehension here that this is a lack of focus from him, that he's not able to regulate things. Every man has his breaking point, and it sounds like he's getting very, very close to it. His focus to this point has been arguably just superhuman, but it sounds like it's coming to a head and very, very close to imploding for him.
You're absolutely right. And he says, "What did the Phillies want from me? What indeed did Mr. Rickey expect of me? I was, after all, a human being. What was I doing here, turning the other cheek as though I weren't a man? In college days, I had had a reputation as a black man who never tolerated affronts to his dignity. I had defied prejudice in the army. How could I have thought that barriers would fall, that indeed my talent could triumph over bigotry? For one wild and crazed minute, I thought, to hell with Mr. Rickey's noble experiment. It's clear it won't succeed. Then I thought of Mr. Rickey and how his family and friends had begged him not to fight for me and my people. The haters had almost won that round. They had succeeded in getting me so upset that I was an easy out. By the third day of our confrontation with these emissaries from the city of brotherly love, they had become so outrageous that Ed Stanky exploded. He started yelling at the Phillies. It was then that I began to feel better. I remember Mr. Rickey's prediction. If I won the respect of the team and got them solidly behind me, there would be no question about the success of this experiment. So, Greg, the founder of Four Seasons, Isidore Sharp, once said, "Excellence is the capacity to take pain." And Jackie's ability to take pain here is just quite remarkable. Again, I'll say that. Excellence is the capacity to take pain. He's taking it, and now slowly his teammates are rallying around Jackie.
Without a doubt, we are, as we've mentioned in previous episodes here, we are social mammals, and we want to be included and to be part of essentially the tribe, and feel a sense of belonging and feel like other people support us and have our back and feel protected and valued, and all of the things that evolutionary have actually been nothing but a benefit to going forward through human development. So there's no surprise here that that's what Jackie wants to feel, and to see almost a bit of a, well, what's the word? Almost like a Spartacus moment here with Ed Stanky stepping in and kind of stepping up to the plate. Again, no pun intended there. Jackie is starting to see that people other than just Mr. Rickey have his back, and that want him to be part of this organization and want him to be part of this pursuit. And are willing to share that pain a little bit with him here and try and ease his burden and alleviate that for him. The capacity to take pain doesn't necessarily just have to be an individual pursuit. It can be chopped up and shared among the collective. And I think as social mammals, that's something that we do particularly well. And it's great to see people stand up for Jackie in this moment.
And there's another instance in the book, Greg, where he shares a story of a teammate stepping up. He said, "I was helped over these crises by the courage and decency of a teammate who could have easily been my enemy rather than my friend. In Boston, during a period when heckling pressure seemed unbearable, some of the Boston players began to heckle Pee Wee Reese. They were riding him about being a Southerner and playing ball with a black man. Pee Wee didn't answer them. Without a glance in their direction, he left his position and walked over to me. He put his hand on my shoulder and began talking to me. His words weren't important. I don't even remember what he said. It was the gesture of comradeship and the support that counted. As he stood talking with me, with a friendly arm around my shoulder, he was saying loud and clear, 'Yell, heckle, do anything you want. We came here to play baseball.' The jeering stopped, and a close and lasting friendship began between Reese and me. We were able not only to help each other and our team in private as well as public situations, but to talk about racial prejudices and misunderstandings." Greg, this is such a powerful paragraph for me, and it's really important to acknowledge that it took a tremendous amount of guts from a teammate like Pee Wee Reese to stand up for Jackie and to do the right thing. And doing the right thing isn't always the easy thing.
Rarely is the right thing the easy thing to do. What we're really seeing here is perhaps the impact that sports was able to make on the civil rights movement and essentially the human rights movement, right? Where if this wasn't on a baseball field, would this have happened? Would he be able to kind of go through this process? I'm talking about Pee Wee Reese here, to be able to do that and be so demonstrable in his support for Jackie, not only as a teammate, but also as a person. And you're right, to do that in front of a crowd that is essentially baying for Reese's blood, as it were, with him playing baseball with a black man. That is an incredibly brave thing to do, and a stand that is, without doubt, the right thing to do.
That 1947 season was memorable in many ways. Some of the incidences that occurred resulted in far-reaching changes for the club. In late August, we played St. Louis Cardinals. In one of the last games, Enos Slaughter, a Cards outfielder, hit a ground ball. As I took the throw at first base from the infielder, Slaughter deliberately went for my leg instead of the base and spiked me rather severely, a 7-inch gash. It was an act that unified the Dodger team. The team had always been close to first place in the pennant race, but the spirit shown after the Slaughter incident strengthened our resolves and made us go on to win the pennant. The next time we played the Cards, we won 2 out of 3 games. I had started the season as a lonely man. I had ended it feeling like a member of a solid team. The Dodgers were a championship team because all of us had learned something. I had learned how to exercise self-control, to answer insults, violence, and injustice with silence. And I had learned how to earn the respect of my teammates. They had learned that it's not skin color, but talent and ability that counts. Maybe even the bigots had learned that too. Greg, there's team cohesion here through adversity, and the Dodgers win the pennant, but ultimately lose in the World Series 4-3 to the Yankees. But you can see the teams coming together through adversity.
Adversity can be a very powerful and uniting tool. Having a common cause and a common purpose to pull together to overcome something is very, very powerful. Now, the team, it might not necessarily be united in the cause that Branch Dickey and that Jackie Robinson have in terms of essentially breaking the color barrier into sports and fully integrating sports. But I think one thing that they can all agree on, they want to win, they want to be successful.
Through the 1947 season, Greg, other teams started to follow Mr. Ricky's example. For example, Larry Doby became the first black player in the American League, signing for the Cleveland Indians, and Willard Brown and Henry Thompson had been hired by the St. Louis Browns. I love the quote, "By endurance we conquer," which is a quote from Ernest Shackleton, the great polar explorer. And Jackie's enduring so that others that come after him can conquer and succeed. Jackie's had to go through this, and then slowly but slowly, more and more black players are coming into the league. Going into the 1948 season, he says, "When I reported for spring training in the Dominican Republic in 1948, I was 25 pounds over playing weight. I wasn't hitting, and in fact, the whole season started badly for the Dodgers. The experience of being out of shape was a sobering one. After that, I vowed it would never happen again. Almost any athlete who's had the same experience knows how grim it can be. I had had a miserable start, but I ended the season batting .296 with 12 home runs and 85 runs batted in. I led the American League in being hit with 7 pitched balls, a dubious distinction. I suffered them because I hoped to provide a better future for my children and for young black people everywhere, and because I naively believed that my sacrifices might help a little to make America the kind of country it was supposed to be. I was relieved when Mr. Ricky finally called me into the office and said, "Jackie, you're on your own now. You can be yourself now." So this is Branch Ricky talking, and he says, "I knew also that while the wisest policy for Robinson during those first 2 years was to turn the other cheek and not fight back, there were many in baseball who would not understand this lack of action. They could be made to respect only the fighting back, the things that are signs of courage to men, who know courage only in its physical sense. So I told Robinson that he was on his own. Then I sat back happily, knowing that, with the restraints removed, Robinson was going to show the National League a thing or two. I told the commissioner exactly how I felt, and that while I had no intention of creating problems, I was no longer going to turn my cheek to insults. It felt good to be able to breathe freely, to speak out when I wanted to." So, Greg, we're hearing here the restraint, the burden has been taken off Jackie, and this has got to be so psychologically freeing, while at the same time, he's also still got to manage his emotions to a degree.
This isn't just a green light to go around whacking people, but this is a green light to be himself, to be authentically who Jackie Robinson is. You know, he's had to play a role here almost, you know, kind of put on a performance to make himself seem palatable by the consumers of the sport and the people within it. Now he's sort of paid his dues to be able to be a more authentic version of himself here.
In 1949, he was named MVP by the sports writers, and in 1950, he signed a contract for $35,000, which in those days was a very good paycheck. Don't forget, his first contract was for $4,800 with the Kansas City Monarchs, and that was only a few years prior to this. So jumping ahead a little bit, in 1955, the team made it into the World Series. It was the 5th series that they had been in during his 9 seasons with the Dodgers. And they end up beating the New York Yankees 4-3. And he says it was one of the greatest thrills of his life to finally be a World Series champion. The way I figured it, I was even with baseball, and baseball was even with me. The game had done so much for me, and I had done so much for it. And in 1956, he had begun to exhibit the effects of diabetes and to lose interest in the prospect of playing or managing in professional baseball. Robinson ended his major league career when he struck out at the end of Game 7 in the 1956 World Series, where they lost a game to the New York Yankees. So as I mentioned at the beginning, he was the first black inductee into the Baseball Hall of Fame at Cooperstown. And he says, in 1962, there's a great deal of conjecture about whether I'd be elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame. Hall of Fame winners are determined by the Baseball Writers of America, an extremely powerful organization. And since I was a controversial personality in the eyes of the press, I steeled myself for rejection. All the greats of the past had been elected to the Hall of Fame. That is, all the white greats. For of course, before I got my chance in baseball, black players weren't even admitted into competition. That meant that election to the Hall of Fame would not be as important to me as an individual recognition as it would be terribly significant in symbolizing one of full acceptance of blacks in the baseball world. If I got elected into the Hall, I wanted to get in there because I made it by the standards. The standards are clearly defined. On the evening of Tuesday, January 23rd, I learned that the baseball writers had given me 124 out of 160 ballots cast. Truthfully, after having steeled myself to be passed over and not to let it hurt me a lot, I was almost inarticulate. Being recognized, Greg, for his baseball accomplishment, first and foremost, is something Jackie stresses throughout the book, although he obviously recognizes that his career meant so much more than just baseball for the black community.
We have talked about this previously with performers in other episodes about doing something that is essentially bigger than themselves, or performing for a reason other than just them and what it means to them. And of course, you want to, as an athlete and as a performer, be as good as you could possibly can be, because it reflects good on you. And, you want to leave your mark in the game and in the sport and whatever realm of performance that you choose to participate in. But you cannot be unaware of the larger social implication in this situation.
So he comes to his Hall of Fame speech and he says, "At the precise moment when the dream of all baseball players came true for me, I said to the audience at Cooperstown that I felt my induction should be shared with three people in the audience that had meant the most to me: my mother, my wife, and Mr. Rickey. I asked them to come and stand by my side, and they did. From Mr. Rickey's reaction, I knew it was a great moment for him." Early in December 1965, the message came: Mr. Rickey was dead. As I mourned for him, I realized how much our relationship had deepened after I left baseball. It was the later relationship that made me feel almost as if I had lost my own father. Branch Rickey, especially after I was no longer in the sports spotlight, treated me like a son. Often when you're useful to people, they give you all the affection and respect you could possibly need. But after I left the game, after I had nothing left to offer Mr. Rickey in the business life, he continued to remain close to me, to be concerned about how I was doing. Without that kind of support from some of the people in baseball who had power, I could not have made it. No matter how well I performed, no matter how loyal black people were, I am well aware that there were countless other whites not as well known or influential who were in my corner. Greg, nobody does it alone, again. And he's highlighted there, he wouldn't have made it without those gatekeepers and without support of certain individuals in his life.
And I think that is an important point where Ricky was certainly the forefront, the person who was in the spotlight as being that gatekeeper. But I'm sure, he's talked about this here, other lesser known, other less influential people who were pulling for him, maybe not always in public, but certainly in private. And as you rightly put it, no one does it alone. It certainly takes a village.
Life, in spite of all the ups and downs, life has been very good to me individually. Personally, I've been very fortunate. Why then do I insist that I never had it made? It is because I refuse to kid myself about the value of having a comfortable home, about having a little money in the bank, about having received awards and trophies and honors, and having had the opportunity to talk and walk with some of the most influential people in the world in all phases of activity. A life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives. Life owes me nothing. Baseball owes me nothing. But I cannot, as an individual, rejoice in good things I have been permitted to work for and learn while the humblest of my brothers is down in the deep hole hollering for help and not being heard. That is why I have devoted and dedicated my life to service. I have many memories. I remember standing alone at first base, the only black man on the field. I had to fight hard against loneliness, abuse, and the knowledge that any mistakes I made would be magnified because I was the only black man out there. I had to fight hard to become just another guy. I had to deny my true fighting spirit so that the noble experiment could succeed. When I finally did become my own man, many people resented my impatience and honesty. But I never cared about acceptance as much as I cared about respect. I have always fought for what I believed in. I have had a great deal of support, and I have tried to return that support with my best efforts. However, there is one irrefutable fact in my life which has determined much of what has happened to me. I was a black man in a white world, and I never had it made. And Greg, that is where we'll leave it. But as always, Greg, success leaves clues. So what are your top 10 life lessons from I Never Had It Made by Jackie Robinson?
Number 1, seek strength in role models. Beyond athletics, find inspiration and strength from societal leaders who challenge the status quo and advocate for justice. Number 2, embrace resilience from early life experiences. The struggles and experiences from your early life can instill resilience and a sense of purpose that drives future success. For example, Jackie's early experiences of hardship, like having his father leave and the lessons from his mother, played a crucial role in shaping his resilient character. He says, "As I grew older, I often thought about the courage it took for my mother to break away from the South. She indoctrinated us with the importance of family unity, religion, and kindness towards others. Her great dream for us was that we'd go to school." Number 3, harness the power of community. Draw strength and support from your community to propel you through personal and professional challenges. Jackie's connection to his racial and local community provided a sense of strength and belonging. Number 4, overcome adversity with resilience. Build resilience by facing adversities head on, learning and growing from each challenge. For example, Jackie's rise through numerous societal and professional hurdles highlights his resilience. Number 5, maintain integrity, particularly under pressure. Uphold your principles and your values, even when faced with intense challenges and oppositions. For example, Robinson's steadfastness in maintaining his dignity and integrity in the face of racial hostility helped him to propel himself through the ranks of baseball. Number 6, value and strive for education. Recognize the transformative power of education and continually seek knowledge and self-improvement. Number 7, lead by example. Demonstrate leadership through actions, setting a standard for others to follow. Number 8, pursue your passions despite challenges. Follow your passions relentlessly, even when external circumstances make it difficult. Jackie says, I enjoy competition and I was aggressive in my determination to win. Number 9, support others who struggle. Use your position and experiences to support and uplift others who face similar challenges. For example, Jackie's efforts to help other African American players succeed in Major League Baseball. Number 10, keep fighting for justice. Continuously advocate for fairness and equality, both within your industry and society at large. Jackie's lifelong dedication to civil rights and equality, both on and off the field, is a central tenet to his story. He says, but I cannot, as an individual, rejoice in the good things I have been permitted to work for and learn, while the humblest of my brothers is down in a deep hole, hollowing for help and not being heard.
And Greg, another fantastic top 10. As with every performer, we like to invert the problem of performance and use the maxim by Charlie Munger, avoiding stupidity is easier than seeking brilliance. So what are your top 10 lessons to avoid on the path to high performance from Jackie Robinson's story?
Okay, so I'll read that. I'll read this list without seeking brilliance and just looking to avoid stupidity. Here we go. Number 1, avoid neglecting self-care. Failing to take care of your physical and mental health can diminish your performance and resilience. Jackie Robinson often pushed himself to the limits without adequate rest, which impacted his health and performance. He says, I couldn't sleep and often I couldn't eat. Number 2, don't bottle up emotions. Keeping emotions bottled up can lead to increased stress and might impact decision-making and mental health. Number 3, resist failing to engage fully in team dynamics. Not fully engaging with team dynamics can create barriers to effective collaboration and support, which are essential for team success. Number 4, avoid ignoring early warning signs of burnout. Ignoring signs of burnout can lead to a major breakdown in both personal well-being and professional performance. For example, Jackie experienced signs of burnout and physical symptoms due to the relentless stress and pressure he faced while traveling on the road. He said, the toll that incidents like these took were greater than I'd realized. Number 5, don't underplay the importance of mental preparation. Underestimating the importance of mental preparation and focus can adversely affect your ability to handle pressure and perform under stress. Number 6, don't underestimate the importance of diverse perspectives. Ignoring diverse viewpoints and insights can prevent you from fully understanding situations and making well-rounded decisions. Number 7, maintain your physical condition. Neglecting physical fitness can impair performance and professional longevity. Jackie Robinson once arrived at pre-season training 25 pounds overweight, which affected his early season performance. Number 8, don't overlook the need for strategic career planning. Failing to prepare strategically for your career's progress can result in missed opportunities and career stagnation. Robinson's early career decisions were sometimes reactive rather than proactive, relying heavily on external circumstances. Number 9, avoid the trap of negative public perceptions. Allowing public perceptions and media narratives to influence personal identity and self-worth can lead to negative self-esteem and public relations issues. Robinson sometimes struggled with the public and media portrayal of his role in baseball and civil rights. He said, I had to fight hard to become just another guy. And finally, number 10, Don't shy away from utilizing all of your available resources. Not making full use of available resources, whether people, technology, or information, can limit your effectiveness and growth. There were times when Jackie could have leveraged more support from his allies within and outside of baseball. He says, I knew that as the first black player in the major leagues, I was in a unique position. Then there were times I felt overwhelmed and isolated because I wasn't making full use of the support available to me. Thank you so much for joining myself and Duncan on this episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, please take a moment to click like and to subscribe. And we ask that you take a moment out of your day to spread the word by sharing this with 2 people in your network. And for that, we are truly grateful. See you next time on Performers.